Honeypots are not only for good guys anymore.
Hey Ganesh, I hear you have a story on botnets with the use of honeypots.
Yes, Chris. It's a novel way of using the honeypots. I thought it would be interesting to discuss with Jim and you, and probably even that they have done some very beautiful and detailed analysis by the NetLab labs. But I would like to pivot most of my talking on the use of the honeypots. Okay, the background is what is this botnet? Since how long has this been in play? This has been found by NetLab researchers, and they found this specific new variant of the botnet being in play since end of February 28th. Why is this interesting to me? What they observed in their honeypots is usage of several ELF-based libraries, samples with very well-known techniques, as well as some additional techniques which they changed to suit their needs, I believe. Those are the salient features. But of all these salient features, one of the most interesting aspects is they're leveraging the usage of honeypot on the same concept to basically infect the other devices and grow their botnet. This has been named as ZHtrap by them, and this is the botnet known for now as it is. What are the capabilities? There seems to be, it leverages 4 different types of vulnerabilities as well as remote code executables, which are well known. Some are very old. As I go in detail in a little bit time, the timeline is very old. It seems like that even the old vulnerabilities exist. There are still devices which are exposed to these vulnerabilities, which is a sad part. As I said, it sets up the honeypots and infected devices. Once it's infected the device, it tries to get the snapshots of the running new commands, which is a typical tactics of any botnets nowadays. And finally, it borrows some code not the techniques from Matrios botnet, which leverages the use of Tor as well as the cloud-based configurations for CT communications, as well as additional processes to run. That being said, what is the code base it uses? I think on the underlying code is borrowed heavily from Mirai, but they put their own additional features, like they added some sort of checksums to be added to check the validity, I think from additional checks point of view, and then scanning and distinguishing between the real devices as well as the scanners/honeypot devices used by the security researchers. Also, finally, what they did is they implemented a couple of XR algorithms for encryption. Basically, it seems they're used by the Mirai, but they rewrote actually and re-enhanced to suit their needs. On my research, it seems there's about 3 versions of this specific botnet in existence, but the analysis of this blog is based on the version 2. There are some similarities between V1 and V2, but I think each version they're iterating with new features. Now pivoting to only the honeypot feature of this botnet, what it does. What it does is basically it listens for different ports. I think the number is various 23 different ports and it captures. Once it sets up these different 23 ports, what it does is tries to listen for all the IP addresses trying to connect to those specific ports, any of those ports. Once it sees an IP or maybe a bunch of IPs, what it does is it grabs a list of all the IPs connecting to these ports and creates a list out of that. Once it grabs that list, what it does is it passes those IP lists to its own scan engine to see what kind of additional information it can gain. By leveraging that information, what it does next is either it tries to recruit into the additional honeypot as part of the botnet, and it can also leverage them to do some nefarious activities. If it is not recruiting for the honeypot extension, it will do some sort of DDoS attacks as well as exploit vulnerability. How is it possible? Okay. And I was telling basically there are 4 exploits it's heavily using. some of them we are very well aware of. Any of the IoT botnet seems to be using it. The first one is the JAWS, DVR, remote code execution vulnerability. Second is, I think, it's typically geared about the Netgear-based devices. And the third one is CCTV DVR. Typically, I think it's a long swath for any IoT devices. And the fourth one is, I think, Jim, you will be surprised to hear this one. It's a CVE from year 2014, and that seems to be the last one they are leveraging to actually grow this botnet. Once it has a botnet, there's different ways it does. It does by whitelisting as well as taking a snapshot. This is also one feature it felt real interesting to me. Once it finds the infected device, what it does is immediately tries to get some sort of a snapshot of the processes running on it. And while it does, what it does is it tries to exclude any of the processes, maybe executables coming from the past, like a /bin, /has been from the Linux thing. I think anything coming from that part, it treats it as a legitimate. So once it has that list, what it does is it tries to remove anything which is not part of a couple of paths. There are five, six paths. I think bin and has-been comes to my mind. I think another one is etc path. If anything other than those paths, what it does is that it tries to kill with kill-9 command so that it won't come back. Once after killing, again, it creates another snapshot. That uses that snapshot, and any time any new process is coming, anything, it frequently checks with the list it has. If it is not on the list of the snapshot, it tries to basically kill that process. In the sense, basically it has a complete control of the infected device. So these are the two very salient features which is unique and utilizing the honeypots like we do. Even in this case, basically they're using the technology and tactics and they're using against security researchers. Those are the two important points I want to bring both of your attention and see what comments or what suggestions you have with respect to this botnet.
Yeah, this was an interesting one. It's the first time that I've ever seen malware that set up its own honeypot, and it was it's listening on 23 of the most commonly scanned ports out there, 80, 80, 80, 80, 81, 55, 55, 88, 88. When I first heard about this, I was going, why would they bother? But I guess one of their goals is to turn around and take over some systems that somebody else has already exploited that is out doing the scanning, or I don't know. This one was an interesting read. And that exploit from 2014 that it's doing, I think that was a universal plug and play, if I remember correctly. Just really a strange exploit to be using, but.
Yeah, my thoughts are pretty much as like you, Jim, with respect to using the honeypots. It was a speculation from the researchers who did, like you said, the confidence is if they're thinking, I think if some IP is traversing any of these ports within my honeypot, that means most likely the IP might have been already infected, or it could be a scanner. And once they're doing their additional check, they can pretty much rule out whether it's a scanner or not. And they have, again, two processes based on, two trigger actions, I would say, not the processes, based on what the outcome is. If it's a scanner IP, it does with the specific port and communicates with the C2 server. The C2 server / report server with the outcome. And if it is not a scanner, that IP is communicated with a different port with the IP report server. So they have, in this sense, I think they're gathering actually very good list of IP addresses in this technique. as well as they have a code base basically to generate random IP addresses. And they're combining both of these techniques to grow the botnet, as well as I think it can be leveraged in DDoS attacks. That's really interesting and unique way. And I felt, we haven't seen this technique, and it won't be the last time you see something novel technique coming up.
We've been talking about these internet connected DVR type devices, and two of the four exploits are targeting those, and another one's targeting Netgear devices. All of these devices that don't ever seem to get patched, and if they are vulnerable, they stay vulnerable forever. So please don't connect them to the internet.
So I think it kind of goes to show how security is such a back and forth. Like security researchers are creating honeypots to help catch adversaries, and adversaries just take that technology and just use it to continue creating more botnets. And even vice versa, even some security research are probably taking some cues from hackers and then building them into their defensive systems too.
Jim, I think it goes with any powerful tool, right? It can go either way based on who the actor is. It can be used for good purposes as well as evil purposes.
Yeah, well, and I thought it interesting that they're collecting these list of IPs that they believe are honeypots that they can then throw into an exclude list so that they don't scan those in the future, where they might potentially alert us that they're doing that. They've collected this list of IPs of honeypots. So hey, the researchers are there. Let's avoid those.
And like you pointed, Jim, in those 23 codes, we remember that by looking at most of them are maybe 90+% of those are related to IoT devices, right? Like 555 is ADP, and others. Basically, we have seen numerous times associated with several botnets. And I think that's where they're seeing, if anything is scanning happening on those ports, most likely it's related to some sort of a botnet-related activity.
2323, the original Mirai port, and, port 22.
And I just want to say, with the final thing I just want to bring, once it found, how is it fingerprinting, what kind of, whether it's a honeypot or not, is, I think once on the infected device, it kind of runs, I think, 6 to 7 Linux I should say Linux/Unix commands to determine what is the OS fingerprint of the device. I think each command leads to the another one, and each command they basically could able to confidently say it's what kind of device it is, what kind of scanner it is. When you look at it, they all seems to be innocuous and certain, Linux-based commands. But I think when they combine all of them together, that's what the more value to them. And there are some IOCs actually. I think the blog itself, they've done a tremendous job with the technical analysis. But for our discussion, I thought these two will be important points. And basically, I want to get your thoughts, Jim, especially how would we do in these scenarios? I know we thought, everybody uses honeypot. In this scenario, how can we basically turn it into helping us rather than acting against us?
Most of the time, we use honeypots as a passive device. So, we're not going to be scanning to trigger one of these things that then turns around and does a reverse scan against us. I suspect, though, that in doing their scanning, they're probably going to avoid most of our basic, more passive honeypots. We don't have a lot of really high interaction type honeypots out there, but yeah, these guys are actually. We'll notice the initial scanning, but they won't go very far trying to exploit it, because things like Cowrie are pretty obvious.
I hear what you say, and I think I'm good to hear that. If that is the case, if we have a honeypot, they're not scanning your network, I'm okay with that. What do you say?
Some of the honeypots are not going to be detected just because we're not doing anything obvious with it. But some researchers I know have, the Internet Storm Center that I'm a part of, we have a lot of honeypots out there that are running Cowrie. Well, if they get scanned, they'll get flagged as honeypots right away. Maybe that protects them in a sense because they get on this list of honeypots so that this particular actor doesn't go after them trying to exploit them. But I don't know. It's interesting. It is always a constant arms race with the bad guys. And now that we know some of the specific things they're looking for in honeypots, we can change our behavior to try to catch more of their interactions.
I was interested when I was reviewing the article that they actually built their exploit to work on MIPS architecture too. Still a major CPU architecture, but a little less common. You kind of think of Intel x86 and ARM. But I was a little surprised to see MIPS. People were still making exploits for MIPS architectures.
Well, but if you look at the exploits, they're going after some of the Netgear, and a lot of the early Mirai stuff was targeting IoT stuff running on MIPS. So if they're going to try to, retake some of those devices that were previously exploited by things like, some of the early Mirai, then they do need to target MIPS too, because there are still quite a few of those IoT devices out there running on MIPS chips.
Yeah, Jim well said, basically. I would just want to add, since it's borrowed the code from Mirai, as Jim pointed out, Mirai is heavily into ARM, RISC, even Intel, those x86, all those architectures are there. Though they started with, initially Mirai started with, I think, 5 or 6 architectures. There were some variants and new IoT botnets. They went up to, I think, 8 or 9 variants of different architectures. So that is one reason, basically, I did not mention about the various architecture this specific one is targeting. I just cut it off at the Mirai-based one. But like you pointed out, I think in this scenario, the researchers, they picked that for Intel-based, I think x86-based variant of this malware, and they analyzed it. But there are also other variants. I think probably if we can contribute, maybe lucky, we can get a couple on the internet, the scan engines, to analyze further.